all body functions and hormones. Light sleep is essential because it comprises about 50% of the night's sleep. And with a lack of sleep, several hormones that affect weight will not balance, such as leptin and ghrelin, cortisol, and growth hormone. So in light sleep, body maintenance is occurring, bringing a balance in bodily functions and hormones. During light sleep, the metabolic rate is reduced by about 15%. And the amount of energy, calories, the body burns to maintain itself is called metabolism. And that's why my basal rate of insulin, my insulin pump, is so low compared to other times of the day. It's 0.35 units per hour compared to 0.725 at breakfast time. And I don't need as much energy to supply my needs at night, thus I need less insulin. So picture a person's tense arm muscles holding a shield to deflect incoming harmful arrows. During deep sleep, the immune system is strengthened. Growth hormone is secreted, which results in cellular rebuilding and repair. And this is also the time the body uses for muscle developments. So in deep sleep, the body secretes growth hormone that promotes the immune system and builds and repairs muscles. Also, picture a profile of a person's brain with colorful lights going off and on in the brain. Processing and storing information happens during the REM, the rapid eye movement phase of sleep, the stage of sleep. Vivid dreams occur, the body relaxes, and the volunteer skeletal muscles, they turn off. And that could prevent acting out those vivid dreams. Not wild, vivid. If deep sleep is about the body, REM sleep is about the brain. And mental restoration occurs so that you can think and decide clearly during the day. So, in REM sleep, the body restores your nervous system, processes information, and stores memories. Now, how do you feel when you wake up after a night's sleep? Do you look like that? Are you groggy and feel like you haven't slept? Or do you wake up refreshed? I found my Fitbit health tracker very beneficial for helping me and keeping me aware of the kind of sleep I'm getting. It also identifies how much of the night I'm awake. And this helps me plan my schedule for when to go to bed and get up to get adequate sleep. The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. So what happens when you can't get enough sleep? What happens? Well, sleep deprivation impacts physical health. And there's an impairment of hormones that relate to appetite. Less leptin, the feel full hormone, is released, and more of ghrelin, the still hungry hormone. And this makes losing weight an even more significant challenge. So the strategy is to sleep more and lose weight. Studies also reveal that cortisol levels increase the next evening after just one night of sleep loss, causing insulin resistance. Also, the efficiency of the immune system is damaged, as well as the increase in inflammation with a lack of sleep. And so sleep deprivation also causes a depletion in serotonin, increased pain sensitivity, and increased feelings of anxiety, malaise, and even depression. So how does your body increase its serotonin production? Well, by telling you to crave foods that are high in carbohydrates. And what does that do? It helps you gain weight, doesn't it? So studies report a link between high blood pressure and sleep deprivation. Without ample resting time, the heart muscle gets fatigued. And because your heart has to work harder, you can have increased blood pressure. A study of shift workers with irregular sleep found that the volunteers had definite metabolic disturbances clearly linked to insulin resistance. Sleep more and you'll eat less and weigh less. In a society with readily available foods and beverages, the longer we are awake, the more likely we are to eat and drink. Hey, I got a good night's sleep last night, and my blood pressure this morning was good. It's not always that way. How can you prevent the effects of blue light on getting to sleep? Turn off all bright or blue lights at least an hour before bed. And they impede the production of melatonin that helps you to get to sleep. Stop scrolling, wind down, create a 30 to 60 minute wind down routine before bed. And during your wind down, it's best to perform relaxing activities such as a nighttime hygiene, reading from a real book, or stretching. Block out distractions. Keep your sleep area clear of excess noise and light. And here's two more things. Certain foods help promote sleep. The Institute of Health Sciences recommends foods that contain tryptophan, which helps induce the production of serotonin, which is required to make melatonin. And melatonin is a hormone that regulates sleep-wake cycles. The body produces more during darkness, preparing the body for sleep. Light has the reverse effect. Foods that help with this are grass-fed dairy products, nuts, fish, chicken, turkey, sprouted grains, beans, brown rice, eggs, and sesame seeds, sunflower seeds. Eat melatonin-rich foods like bananas, barley, tomatoes, and radishes. Doesn't that sound exciting? I'm not having this part of the video. I've got to slow down sometimes, trying to get this compact in there. But so here we go. Instead of focusing on the good when going to bed, what can easily happen is to focus on problems or worries, stressful events. Thinking about them over and over again is not conducive to falling asleep. In fact, by meditating on them, they are compounded and become independent of reality. And these worries can quickly become worse and more powerful than they are. And doing this leads to restlessness and mounting obstacles and hazards for falling asleep. Instead, dwell on what is good and fight off anxiety and worry. Anyone who seeks what is good finds goodwill, but evil comes to him who searches for it. So, take a nap. Take a nap after lunch. I'm too busy, or I'm at work. Then take one when you get home. Here is how God's wisdom relates to taking a nap and getting the best results. Listen to advice and accept instruction, and in the end, you will be counted among the wise. And when you walk, the teaching instructions, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will speak to you. And so this is how wisdom worked for Jesus in taking a nap during a storm. Jesus napped during a storm on the Sea of Galilee. And that day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat, and there were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. And Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" When was Jesus sleeping? During a storm. Yes, during a storm. A wisdom insight on how he could do this is found in Proverbs chapter 3. "My son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet." So how could Jesus be sleeping during a storm? What are we told to count when we can't get to sleep? Sheep. But God's wisdom says blessings. Give thanks in all circumstances, 1 Thessalonians 5. Now, Winston Churchill said this: "Nature has not intended mankind to work from 8 in the morning until midnight without that refreshment of blessed oblivion, which even if it only lasts 20 minutes, is sufficient to renew all vital forces. We could add more than nature about God's wisdom. God's wisdom would condone taking a nap as seen with Jesus. And so give me one good reason why I should nap. Well, Dr. Sarah Mednick, in her book, Take a Nap, Change Your Life, gives 20 reasons why we should take a nap. Some of the reasons relate to diabetes self-management, and the 9th reason she gives is that sleepy people are more susceptible to junk food cravings. So Dr. Mednick reports that sleeplessness causes hypertension, but during sleep, blood pressure decreases. So when you are awake longer than usual, your blood pressure remains higher than normal. And this can also result in a higher risk for strokes. And when we deprive ourselves of sleep, we enter a period of overdrive and need extra energy to support physical functions. Also, irritability, anger, depression, and mental exhaustion are linked with sleeplessness. And nap can reduce stress. Stress and anxiety result from the adrenal gland producing too much cortisol. Cortisol also causes resistance to your insulin and higher blood sugar levels. So don't worry. Start napping. Now, you've all heard of Yogi Berra, haven't you? Well, here he is. Yeah. Yogi Berra said, I usually take a 2-hour nap from 1 to 4. What is the optimal length of time for a nap? Various lengths bring different beneficial results. If you have time to nap as long as Yogi, you would sleep through all the stages of sleep. And if you don't have that kind of time, even a 20-minute nap of light sleep brings benefits. Here's how to go about napping. Dr. Mednick, a nap expert, gives these guidelines for napping. Keep the room as dark as possible. Go for quietness. Stay warm, proper posture, and no food. Those 20 minutes will help rejuvenate alertness and improve motor skills like typing. 30 to 60-minute naps or slow wave sleep brings better decision making and short-term memory, but grogginess when awakening. So according to a recent study, one way to remedy the negative effects of a poor night's sleep is to just take a short nap the next day. Get in the proper position and look at the power nap as the 20 minutes or less. You can reap benefits in as little as 5 minutes. Naps under 20 minutes can increase alertness, improve physical dexterity, boost stamina, and lower stress. Post-lunch naps of 15 minutes have been shown in university studies to increase alertness and performance, and replace it with, in less than 20 minutes, I will restore my alertness for the rest of the day. So, I've got an example to share with you now. With all of this in mind, we must live in day-tight compartments. And here's why. When Thomas Carlyle had finished writing his History of the French Revolution, he took the manuscript to his neighbor John Stuart Mill for proofreading. And Mill came to Carlyle's house with disastrous news a few days later. His maid had used the manuscript to start a fire in the fireplace. And Carlyle heard about that. He raged like a madman for several days. For 2 whole years, he had poured himself into writing that manuscript, and now the maid had reduced his 2 years of hard work to ashes. And after that, Carlyle thought he could never give himself to writing, to the demanding discipline of writing. And one day he stood looking out his second-story window, and he saw a stonemason slowly and patiently rebuilding a collapsed wall. It came to me that as they laid brick on brick, so could I lay word on word, a sentence on sentence, and he did. Jesus teaches us to live life one day at a time. He says, give us today our daily bread. And so, now we're going to go to the next section. Okay, I think we've got plenty of time to go for it. So how can we manage the stress hormones, keeping them close to a normal range? When we practice doing the following 3 things, we can keep cortisol levels from being elevated. First, we've looked at sleep. Now let's consider the powerful attitude builder for health, gratitude. Here is God's wisdom principle for this, for gratitude. It goes like this. Like cold water to a weary soul is good news from a distant land. Now someone might say, well, what in the world do I have to be thankful about? I feel overwhelmed. Well, again, good news brings health to the body. You ought to look for it. And so there was a study done. It's called the Dawn study. And this is the second one that was done. There was 8,600 adults, 1,400 type 1 diabetes, 7,300 type 2 people with diabetes. And here were the conclusions, 2 negative psychosocial themes. One of them, anxiety, worry about hypoglycemia and complications of diabetes, depression, hopelessness, and discrimination at work and public misunderstanding about diabetes. And here was the ways to cope with that. Having a positive outlook and sense of resilience, receiving support through caring and compassionate family, friends, healthcare professionals, and other people with diabetes. One way to have the positive outlook is through gratitude. And I will now show you how to develop this virtue. First of all, the research benefits. I'll start by giving the research on gratitude and what gratitude will do for you, and then give you a complete picture of the history of diabetes management so that you can understand why you should be thankful. Then we'll look at different ways to develop an attitude of gratitude. And so there's health benefits. From the practice of gratitude, they've been shown from intensive scientific studies by Robert Emmons, PhD, the University of California at Davis, by researchers at the University of Pittsburgh, Manchester, University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Michigan, and more. And from this research, a practice of gratitude contributes to feeling more optimistic and connected with others, sleeping better, improving medicine and meal compliance, exercising more, and reducing levels of the stress hormone cortisol. Gratitude does that. 1,000 participants were randomly assigned one of 3 tasks by Dr. Emmons. It was the gratitude condition group, the hassle group, count burdens, and the count blessings or burdens neutral group. And they were to list 5 things that affected their lives from the previous week. And here were the results after doing this. The gratitude group felt better about their lives. They were more optimistic. They exercised more. And a second daily study led to greater gratitude increases than the weekly practice. Now, is a grateful heart a healthier heart? Well, in receiving a new heart, what good is feeling grateful? The University of Pittsburgh did a study of 119 heart transplant patients. They found that being thankful positively related to perceived feelings of physical and mental health 1 year later. Yes, and thankfulness also predicted better compliance with a meal plan and medications. And so, is there an easy way to be grateful? Someone said our minds are like Velcro for negative information and like Teflon for positive. You've probably noticed how easy it is to focus on the negative. The difference between optimistic and pessimistic attitudes comes from where we focus. And so, I've shown you this, that when it gets dark enough, we can see the stars. And stars are always there, but we don't always see them. Stars are like good things or blessings that we have. The truth is, we don't see something for which we can be grateful often enough. You've got to look for it. Look on the brighter side of life each day and be thankful. And so the wisdom for this, a person says, what in the world do I have to be thankful about? I've got diabetes and I'm worried about so many other things. Well, again, God's wisdom says good news brings health to the body. And what are you going to do with that? Be thankful for the good news. And so here's a test for gratitude awareness. Here we go.
How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
To see the good news, we have to look for it. He who seeks good finds goodwill, but evil comes to him who searches for it, says the proverb. Here's one more that we'll look at tonight. Resources, that is few versus the many. And what is this? Well, it's my dog, my best dog, Ruff. Passed away a few years ago. But we must look at the whole picture to see the good. And I remember Tab, and I puckered my lips like that when I drank Tab. But now, soft drinks are much tastier. Here I was at this hospital in 1960. With all the resources available today, you are now living in the best of times to outsmart diabetes. And add to the resources the principle of God's wisdom like gratitude, patience, perseverance, and discernment, and you can succeed. When I was diagnosed with diabetes in December of 1960 at this hospital in Canyon City, Colorado, I was given this book, How to Live with Diabetes by Dr. Henry Dolger. It was given to me. Dr. Dolger was the distinguished chief of the medical staff of the Mount Sinai Diabetes Clinic in New York City. And very little was known about diabetes then compared to what is known today. There was only one oral medication when he wrote this book. It was called Oronase. Now there are many. A new class of medication relates to the function of the kidneys. One of three is called Jardiance. The kidneys filter about 180 grams of glucose daily, and most of which the body reabsorbs back into the blood. And when glucose levels reach 180 to 200 milligrams per deciliter, the renal threshold, the glucose spills over into the urine. And still the remaining glucose is reabsorbed back into the blood by the sodium glucose co-transporters. But these medications block the glucose in the kidneys from being reabsorbed in the blood, and all of it spills over into the urine instead. And these medications block these glucose co-transporters, and as a result, research indicates that the A1C falls by about 1 point, or 30 milligrams per deciliter. Also, urinating glucose means calories are excreted, which could be 200 to 300 calories daily, which means losing weight. I used only thick, hypodermic needles when doctors diagnosed me with type 1 diabetes more than 60 years ago. Dr. Dolger wrote that it should be a 25 to 26 gauge. A reserve supply of needles should always be kept on hand because needles may bend or break, and in any case, they usually become dull after a couple of weeks of use. I remember those needles becoming dull and very uncomfortable with each painful injection. And today we use insulin pens or syringes with ultra-thin needles of gauges of 31 or 32, not 25 or 26. So one of the treatments for blood sugars and finding out what your blood sugar was these, and test tape is what I used. Test tape, I used it for 21 years, which is a glucose analysis from urine. And when urine was applied, the tape would change from yellow to light medium or dark green, depending on how much glucose was present, or remained the same if there was no glucose. Of course, this would not give current reading like checking blood glucose does today. The renal threshold, or the blood glucose level that spills into the urine, is about 180 to 200 milligrams per deciliter. However, most of the glucose is transported back into the blood. The tight control achieved today with blood glucose meters was much harder to accomplish with test tape. And there you have it. Someone said in a doctor's office, I can't stand to test myself. It hurts. And I say, well, change the test to check. Tell yourself that it's so valuable to have a glucose meter. Use pleasant words. Be careful what you think, because your thoughts run your life. Now, this guy's called Sir Lancelot because he's always checking his blood glucose. And it's easy to do now. You take a little prick of your finger and you can put it on a meter, and that meter will give you the result in 5 seconds. But we need to be reminded to do that. I used to have this. My first glucose meter was an Ames I purchased in the summer of 1981. You had to be near a sink and have a large drop of blood to use it. You place the drop on a strip, push a button on the meter, and a 1 minute countdown will start. Once a minute elapsed, a high pressure dose of water from a small bottle was applied to the strip, washing away what blood had not absorbed into the strip. The strip was then ready to be inserted into the meter for another 1 minute countdown. And finally, after following these procedures, which took over 2 minutes, the result would be displayed. Do you see why the way of wisdom principle of good news and gratitude applies to what we have available today? Getting a reading in 5 seconds? And guess what? We've even got some better news. Today we have insulin pumps with a connection to continuous glucose monitoring systems. And that's what I've got on right here, right there, with a sensor. What is a continuous glucose monitoring system? The system uses a scanning device called a reader or an app for a smartphone. All you have to do is place it about 1 inch over a sensor attached to the back of your arm. The reader then scans from the sensor, and it lasts for about 14 days, what your blood glucose is right then. Now, the reading is from the interstitial fluid, not directly from the blood. The sensor, about the size of 2 stacked quarters, is easily attached to the back of your arm. And a tiny filament remains just under the skin in the arm's interstitial fluid. Glucose first enters the bloodstream before it seeps into the interstitial fluid. So there's a short time lag between the glucose readings from the continuous glucose system and the blood glucose meter. Now, using the trend arrows on the reader, which it points up or down, indicates that your blood glucose is currently a little higher or lower than the glucose number shown. I enthusiastically recommend this device for your use, and if you are low or high, the reader will recommend you do a blood glucose meter check. So here's one more example I want to give you. And it has to do with a person who was diagnosed with diabetes in 1914. It's a really interesting story of James Havens. Let's go farther back in the history of diabetes management to help us be thankful for all the available resources that we have today. Attitude is about all some people have or have had to cope with diabetes. And we'll look at the example of one teenager whose attitude sustained him for more than 7 years before Banting and Best discovered insulin. He was using this proverb, a man's spirit sustains him in sickness, but a crushed spirit who can bear? Doctors diagnosed James Havens with diabetes in 1914. He became the first American to receive insulin in 1922. He lived for almost 8 years on Dr. Allen's starvation therapy, that is, keeping the glucose from spilling into the urine at 180 milligrams per deciliter. And so he used this. He used diligence. The sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. Well, what does diligence mean? It means an idea of it's something sharp, cut, and quick and decisive, and it's a determined action is what it is. And it can result in these kind of virtues, diligence does. And so, some days, he only ate 200 calories during almost 8 years on Dr. Allen's undernutrition therapy. What does 200 calories look like? Well, here's an example of ham on the left side and toasted almonds on the right. That's 200 calories. By the spring of 1922, he had lost 24 pounds and weighed 73.5 pounds. He was too weak to sit in bed and cried most of the time, and he was 22 years old. His condition is not such as to hold out any hope, his dad said, and he was anxious to die and end his misery. So a week ago, last Thursday, marked an historical event, is I then tasted my first egg and toast. Egg on toast is my idea of the only food necessary in heaven. In other words, he's grateful. He had toast or carbs for the first time in almost 8 years. And so he had every morsel of food that he ate meticulously weighed by his mother for over 7 years. If it hadn't been for one of the fortunate ones of being able to receive insulin, he would have died. But instead, he lived another 38 years. We never know what beautiful results will appear when we persevere with patience and planning. We too have access to these powerful principles of planning, perseverance, gratitude, and patience. Do not those who plot evil go astray, but those who plan what is good find love and faithfulness, Proverbs 14. And as a result, we'll be rewarded by using them, which will then reinforce the repeated use in our lives and rewards. Now, James Havens didn't die of diabetes. He died of colon cancer in 1960. After the discovery of insulin, children became adults like me. I've lived with type 1 diabetes for over 62 years because of insulin and wisdom virtues. Here's what happened.
And millions of lives it has saved.
I've been on insulin for 35 years, 26 years, 13 years now.